This is interesting. I'm here with an old friend and colleague, Joe Preston. He's the mayor of St. Thomas. And Joe, you and I, and along with some others in the region, would often travel to Ottawa together because we were MPs
Yes.
at the time and discuss regional issues, so on and so forth. And I know in Ottawa, you were kind of the person that could really work with other people. But I remember you being on a committee that had to do with Afghanistan, and that
Yes.
you had been put in charge of that because of that capacity you have of working with others. It was a very difficult file with a lot of redacted statements and things like that. Um,
Yes.
you navigated all of that, and I always appreciated that, and I always appreciated that we could talk about the region. Ed Holder was also part of
Yes.
that near the end, and I think we could always talk about the region. I want to put that first, so I've always enjoyed that part of it with you. But I did wonder how you felt now about being mayor as opposed to an MP, because I think you were an MP for what, 10 or 11 years?
11 and a half years. Yeah.
11 and a half years, and I think you finished around 2015 or something like
Yeah.
that. And now you're going for your second term of mayor, but you have had 4 years under your belt. You're
Yes.
going for a second term. So you've got
Yes.
enough under your belt as mayor to let me know how you feel about being mayor as opposed to an MP. What are the differences, and do you have one that you like more than the other?
Yeah, certainly being mayor is the best job ever, but I think I've almost said that about every job I had at the time. Um, but you're right, Glenn. First of all, I wanted to recognize, yes, old friends. The friendship's old, not the people. And
Mhm.
so it's been great to spend time to see you again and to spend time. But Parliament was unique in its own thing because collectively we could move mountains. You can get big things done in Parliament, but it really took friendships. It took that relationship, and I made a point, as did you, of getting to be friends with people on every side of the House in
Yeah.
Parliament. I remember when I left in 2015, the Hill Times reported that I said there's maybe only four people in this house that I wouldn't have over for dinner,
Yeah.
and two of them are from my same party.
Yeah.
Well, if the weeks after I got nothing, but am I one of those people? Am I? But it really was about making friends across party lines in order to accomplish things. As you said, when there's heavy jobs, whether it was the Afghanistan committee or the procedure and House Affairs, which I chaired for a long time, took a lot of compromise and cooperation to get it done. And if you didn't enter the room with those thoughts in mind, you probably didn't leave the room with accomplishments.
Yeah.
But boy, my time as mayor is I think I shared with you that my time in Parliament, all the activity was glacial. You knew it was moving, but you could barely tell it was moving.
Yeah.
But the job of mayor is a drastically different piece. I can wake up to a iPhone message in the morning and by noon have somebody's problem resolved,
Yeah.
because you really can just go do it or get someone to go do it. That part is much more rewarding to a businessman, but it does make a difference. And I think it makes a difference in the city when there's people who are able to do those types of activities very quickly.
Well, and you've had some quick success. I think it was last year that Maclean's magazine said St. Thomas was the best city in the country and in Ontario and
Right?
third overall in the country.
That's right.
And that was during your term, your first term. So obviously you've had success, Joe. You've been able to shake things up and make a go of it.
Look, it is no one person or one thing, but I've also had what not every other mayor has is a council that is pulling oars in the same direction. That we decided housing was an issue and we needed to work on housing. And right from the beginning said, but what does that look like? How do we do it? And it's been very successful. There's other communities that are now looking to us. Have we solved it? No. But
Mhm.
we've got the start to the solution that others can follow the start to the solution. Um, it is about having council that is um, willing to take chances, certainly willing to have those hard conversations and not always agree, but at the end of the day, agree what was done that was right,
Yeah.
and say that's past, let's move on, and not keep revisiting projects at the city hall level. And it really has made a difference. It's been a fun group. I say this a lot. I have two former mayors on my council.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so don't think I don't get advice. I mean,
Or
we put.
seek it. I'm sure you seek it as well. Yep.
Well, agreed. And, and,
Yep.
and Steve Peters, the former Speaker of the Provincial House and former Mayor of St. Thomas, is a counselor, and Jeff Kohler, who's a former mayor, is a counselor, and we get along just great. But Steve was the member of provincial parliament when I was the member of federal parliament here, and we would get things accomplished together. And people go, "Wait a second, you're from two different parties. How did you get that done?" Well,
Yep.
you know what we did? We sat down and talked about it. Sometimes with a beer in hand, but
Mm.
we talked about it and said, "What's the most important thing?" Well, now we do it as a council, and if more would think it's not about you winning, but the city winning and the group accomplishing that, we would all have a perhaps better municipal government too.
Yeah. One of the things about this show that I've been trying to do is I continue, and I always have seen London in a larger context, not so much in a global context, but definitely in a national context. So I think it's helpful that a mayor or somebody like you or like Ed Holder in London or Mike Savage in Halifax, who are MPs, got that larger context. So you were right that things moved glacially. I really agree with that. On the other hand, it helps to see, I think, that when you look at particular challenges that you're facing in a local community, really because cities can't raise taxes other than property
Right?
taxes, they can't go
Yeah.
into debt, right? So
Yeah.
they really
We
have
must
to look.
balance our budgets
That's
every
right.
year.
And
Yeah.
look to the senior levels for assistance as you open up new doors and also to cover old things, agreements that you've had for decades, probably. But I would presume it would help to a certain degree that you have had that national exposure to all those different things as you seek to get that kind of help to move St. Thomas to the next level. Is that correct?
Oh, clearly, Glenn, and you're right, whether it's with the federal government cooperation or the provincial government cooperation, perhaps a little bit more through the province because they're the master of municipalities. But knowing the people that are sitting in the chairs of the cabinet of Ontario makes a huge difference to the mayor of St. Thomas. I can pick up the phone and say, I know you didn't ask for this, but can you help me with this issue? Or whether it's a housing issue or a WSIB issue or whoever it might be, which minister we're calling. We were just at AMO in Ottawa, and it was like Old Home Week. It certainly saw a number of my old federal colleagues and a lot of the provincial ministry that we had to make presentations to say, all's well in the world, but we really could use some help with this, this, and this. And what do you think? And
Yeah.
the fact that we can use first names and shake hands and say hi to each other in the hallways makes a big difference from a mayor's point of view.
Yeah.
It's not saying that it has to be that way, but it sure does. As you've seen on the federal level, it helps when there's already. I don't have to work on a relationship. I just have to work on the request at
Yeah.
that point. So.
Yeah. I guess it helps to prioritize a bit too. Is that right, Joe? Like I remember when we were in Ottawa, people would come, groups would come from communities across the country to particular ministry, whatever it is they were wanting to talk to, or committee
Right.
of parliament, or whatever it is, and they were all seeking these kind of supports. But
Right.
when you're at the federal level or the provincial level, you're actually having to prioritize.
Yep.
So you're listening to all these different groups saying, I need this, I need this. You're not going to be able to please all of them. But I
Right.
suppose that when you are a mayor and you're taking a delegation up to Ottawa or Queen's Park, you're very focused. You know, you've had to
Yes.
prioritize. So you have that advantage, I think, of being able to sell things well because you know what you're trying to sell, as opposed to sit there and having to decide which of these 2 out of 20 do I fund. Do I have that correct or am I wrong?
No, extremely correct. You're right. We can't go with a bushel basket full of requests
Yeah.
and say, meet all of these, because it's just not possible. So you need to, as the mayor of this community or a delegation leader, go with your thoughts. If I can ask for this and get it, ask for this and get it, and ask for this and get it, my life will be successful for the next number of months. And that's not to say there isn't phone calls in between those types of things, but you really look, be careful what you ask for because you may not get it. And so you have to, what is the most important thing? What is the most noise I can make as the mayor? And certainly lately, housing and poverty reduction has been one of the things we've been working on the most. And so we want to make sure that we're not out asking for a brand new community center.
Yeah.
I'll take one tomorrow, obviously, if someone wants to help me with it. But let's look at what affects the most citizens in the city of St. Thomas and ask for that and show them how we're already on board.
Yeah. And I want to get into that poverty and especially the housing thing in a bit. But, one of the things that's always interesting about London and St. Thomas is that they're kin, right? They're next to one another, and yet they're also competitors.
Well, clearly, in a neat family kind of way. I always like to compare it to my brothers and I. I mean, we competed like you wouldn't believe, but boy, we would protect each other as clearly as we possibly could too. And I think I found that in St. Thomas. In my time in St. Thomas, I grew up in London, and so I knew both. But I really do. It's about calling an old friend when I call the mayor of London.
Yeah.
And in this case, had our old friends, but even talking to council or being at events where there's many London councillors, it's a lot of similar things. It's I keep teasing that London's the bedroom community for St. Thomas, and we're happier there, right? But it really is both ways. About 4,000 people a day leave St. Thomas and go to London to work, and the opposite is also true. About 4,000 come from London every day out to St. Thomas or Elgin County. Boy, we share a lot. There's a time when Ed and I said, why don't we just stand in Glenworth and make people trade jobs? But it really is about how intertwined our communities are. In London, 10 times the size of St. Thomas, with a university and a college. We have a Fanshawe College branch too, but not to the same degree. And certainly the healthcare situations in London. Yeah. Most people in St. Thomas would generally always say, I've got to go to London to do whatever it is. And so we're trying to become more and more of those joint cities, including with some what used to take place but doesn't anymore, transit, the ability to move from one city to another.
And I think that's one of the great things about it. I brought up the competitor thing because that's sometimes what people will see. But really, when I think of us as a food bank, we really cooperate with the food bank in St. Thomas. That also goes back and forth. The support for both food banks also goes back and forth.
Yes.
But I know Ross Fair is a dear old friend of mine, but he was head of the St. Thomas campus there at St. Thomas, the Fanshawe campus. And I remember him telling me just how those kind of cooperations happened at a business level and other things. So I think, but it's important to realize, I think you can have two different communities who are trying to handle the same problem, but are not trying to do it together. And it's nice to know that under the surface of that competitive piece is this thing where there are these various roots that are intergrown between the two communities that are trying to address a problem. I think that's really true.
Well, we all want to accomplish great things, but sometimes you accomplish great things through your neighbors or with your neighbors. Yeah. And then it's still a great thing. And we can say, hey, remember when when Amazon came, or do you remember when we did this with General Dynamics? Well, General Dynamics isn't in St. Thomas, but we knew that many of the workers were, and so it's okay, right? And sometimes it just has to be the politicians who say, this is a cooperative, collective effort, and we all smile if we all win, and if we all lose, well, that's a bad thing.
So let's talk about some of the poverty and housing thing. It does seem to me, because I was part of a couple of committees in Ottawa, so this is back a decade ago, in which we were really talking about poverty, and we could see that it was real. It was becoming a little bit more pronounced in various communities. But I don't think, none of us saw COVID coming. You and I were there during the Great Recession. Right.
Yes.
So we had to manage a lot of that. That was not easy either. But I think none of us saw COVID coming, and it's kind of changed everything. But especially when it comes to poverty, right, or housing, it looked like it might present some unique advantages at the beginning. But now there are some real economic challenges like inflation, the cost of food and fuel and all those things. So I know that St. Thomas has been in the news a bit lately because I've been reading about it. You've got some funds. I think it was $3 million if it was from the feds or the province. I can't remember, but over a kind of housing initiative. And you also have this thing. I wrote it down: the Compassionate Community Strategic Objective.
Right.
I think it's great you put a title to it, but what is it?
Right.
How does that work?
Well, it makes us think of it. It's part of our strategic plan, and a compassionate community included things like what can we do from a supportive housing, and how do we rebuild our shelter to be a permanent emergency shelter? What do we do from a working community wide with a number of other poverty issues?
Yeah.
Um, you know, if the city's thinking about it, it flows through the community groups in a different way than if, look, you've been part of the food bank for a number of years, and I've been involved in a number of through the United Way and a lot of other process other than my business or being a politician. But if the government levels around you aren't also thinking about the things that are important to you,
Yeah.
it's very hard to go to them for assistance or support.
Yeah.
And now, if we can keep municipal governments thinking of poverty issues and housing issues, because we haven't solved them yet, we think we've created some great solutions along the way. And as you said, COVID jumped right in with both feet and made it a lot harder.
Yeah.
And we now have to kind of recover from that again
Yeah.
to continue to move forward. We think we're on the right track from a supportive housing and a social housing point of view, but it takes a long time to build larger buildings. And so, although our plan looks aggressive and is going very well, it's not complete and truly won't be completed for another 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But our target is there, that we can handle the homeless we have, the people in need of housing that we have in that period of time, provided we don't change our mind and go off in another direction.
Yeah.
Now, as you just mentioned, we're getting a little bit nibbled off the bottom from a poverty point of view. We're creating some more homeless because of what the cost of housing has happened
Yeah.
and the cost of rental has happened. So I can't say never that we'll ever remove the line, but we need to be able to watch both ends of it. We're building a lot of housing in St. Thomas at the single family home and the market rent apartments. But we've got to be able to say, but we may be driving some people into that homelessness piece or near homelessness piece, and we'll need to be able to react to that too. So we're keeping our eye on that pretty solidly. But there's a couple of great community groups out there. Indwell has been a huge help to us, and I know that you know the great work they do too. And we're really trying to help them grow I keep saying, careful guys, you're getting too big, you're doing too much, but you can't stop them because they're very good at what they do. And so we've used them as our support for supportive housing. We realize we can't put people into a 4x4 apartment. We just can't put people into four walls and say, oh, look, we win housing.
Yeah.
We've got to be able to put it, specifically those that have had homelessness as part of their life, into a supportive housing situation. So it comes with mental health supports or addiction support or healthcare supports. Well, I keep looking at the budget book behind me and go, there's no line item in the city of St. Thomas for healthcare. There just is not. But we can do what we do, right, and bring the housing forward. That is part of the role we need to do. And if we can find good groups like Indwell and whether it's the YWCA or Violence Against Women, other community groups to help us with the supports that are needed for that housing, we're far more successful. We move people seriously into a housing first situation that we've been really trying this whole 4 years to accomplish.
Yeah.
Not yet, but really on the right path.
I think the supportive piece is so important. The United Way here, for instance, their harvest lunch is coming up as it is in St. Thomas a couple of days later. But they put a piece out to just the city in general, not just the city hall, but to the city in general, and said, look, when we think of the homeless thing and the housing problems, we have to think of frontline workers.
Yes.
Right? You can't just take a bunch of people that are homeless, shove them into a strip mall or something somewhere, and then just try to feed them and keep them warm in the winter. That doesn't work. These are people. It'd be like somebody going to a hospital, but there's no specialist that's able to help them with
Right.
the difficulties that they've had. So I appreciate what you're saying. And I was reading through your, your compassionate community thing, and I think that's the thing I appreciated most about it was the emphasis that was placed upon these professional people that are in these places who can spot problems that are there and bring, radical sometimes, but also really affirmative solutions to those people. I appreciate that was in the document. Do you feel it's been a success?
Yeah, we recognize that the weight of mental health and addiction problems on our communities is greater now than it was.
Yeah.
We can all argue the cause. We can all also argue a bit of the solution. My wife is what she calls a bipolar survivor. I live with mental health in our house each and every day, and that's really helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Is properly worked with, properly educated, it can become a very normalized situation. And so when we talk to Indwell about mental health on site in the supportive housing, we can take away the crisis days. Are they ever all gone? No, but we certainly have a lot less mental health crisis days in a supportive housing facility. The
Yeah.
same thing with the issue of addiction and can we cure it all overnight? No, that takes a personal responsibility and a personal reaction to want to do it, but we can get it to where it's not a danger. We're not losing people to drug poisoning and the like. And so is it half measures? No, it's 100% measures with about half results each day as we move forward. Well, I'll take half over where we were. We weren't getting it. And so we now are accomplishing things that were never accomplished before. You mentioned our compassionate community objective. And I took over mayor to a city that did not have a shelter. It was a part-time shelter. It operated only in the winter and closed on April 15th. My first April 15th, 2019, the shelter closed. And I'm sorry, that's not being a compassionate community. We have to have at least an emergency spot to be able to help people. And so since that day, we worked hard on building what is now our new emergency shelter with a lot more space, but also it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. A compassionate community has to have that. Do I wish we did not have a shelter? Clearly, I'd love to turn that great new emergency shelter into permanent housing, and perhaps we can get there with enough supportive housing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on a few committees on the homeless file, and we do work with some folks from St. Thomas in that process. We share information back and forth, ideas, those kind of things. But I do think that St. Thomas seems to have something of a handle on it, like you're on a track. I
Right.
think that there's communities like London, I think, has had a bit more of a problem there, and there's probably a number of different reasons. But when winter came, for instance, and COVID came, and agencies
Right.
had to close or cut their operations a lot.
Right.
I mean, we ended up with these winter shelters, and I think I thought I remember somebody in one of these committees saying that St. Thomas had about 100 homeless people. I know you can't do exactly.
Our by names list was 99, and our homeless inventory was again the same 99. So we know that's where we stand. Yes.
So in London, ours is, double that or more. But when it
Right.
came to the winter time, we tried to pull everybody together. The food bank did the feeding programs, or funded the food, that kind of stuff. But what do you do in the winter? Like when COVID hit you 2 or 3 years ago, there, how did you handle that aspect in the winter, the homeless folks?
Well, two problems arose because of COVID. Obviously, we had to be able to expand space and size, not just numbers, because we had to distance people. And so that was quite a significant change to try and find what buildings in town could we use, what do we own. And so we used just about everything the city owned and then some, and are helping community members. But right now it's addressing that capacity. I ask it's the first week of September this week, and I keep asking all through August, what do our capacity numbers look like? Is that 100 still working for us? Will we get through till we have the opening of another supportive housing of 45 units, and you'll like this one, it's 45 supportive housing units and a fire hall. All in a building, because it was a city-owned building and it was going to have a spot for a fire hall. So we said, let's do all this. But those 45 beds don't open till April. So I'm saying, as the mayor, it's August, September. Yep. What's our capacity for the winter look like? I've had in the last couple of years, the ability to say, we can house everybody in town tonight if we need to. We can. We have the capacity. You know, as I do, that not everybody will come in. I get it. There will still be people who won't come in. And they, Mayor, what are you doing? There's homeless on your street. And I said, we've created capacity for each and every one. Those that want to come today, we can do. And we have to make sure that we stay there through August, September, October, November, December, through until we get these next 45 units that will open in April.
Yeah. You know, Joe, our time is almost up. The half an hour, it just flew there. But I did want to say that in speaking with Mike Savage, he talked about how this is the #1 issue for all the big city mayors, the housing, the homeless piece. But he said it's interesting that in a lot of the cities, they see it as just one of the many problems that they have that they're trying to deal with. But he said there's the odd community in which they're laser focused on this. Is if they don't deal with it now, it becomes a bigger problem. And it seems to me that, Joe, that you're one of those people. You came in with that desire in mind, and therefore I think you drew everything else kind of into alignment with that.
Well, as you said, there's lots of other mental health, addictions, poverty. They're all part of this one. But if we can do housing first, it solves 10 or 15 other problems, including employment, including the reduction of poverty, if we can do these all right. So you're right. It's about grabbing the right one in the right way and moving forward that way.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And I think you're a real example of that. And I've appreciated connecting with you again, Joe, on that file. I think that's great. And I know you got an election coming up, as all of them do in Ontario. We do well, but I thank you for the success that you have brought on this particular file, because we need communities that are focused on it. And I think from those communities, solutions will emerge. And that's starting to happen in St. Thomas. And I really thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying so. It is something we've been working exceptionally hard to move forward. I'd like the work not to stop. I'd like to do this next term of council as a way of somewhat finishing that 99-person name by names list we have. I don't think it ever does finish it, but I think it's you can see the horizon of where you can end up if you do the right things.
Yeah, and I've learned this from you over the years. It has to be led by people who can really work with other people. You know, put differences and other things aside. There's some communities where that does not happen, even amongst social agencies, right? That's true.
Great.
It's also true with politicians or business or whatever. But it seems to me if you've got somebody leading that at a governance level that's really good at drawing parties together, there's a real chance. And I think that's maybe a real part of the reason why you've had some success there. I really appreciate it.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's still progress, folks. And we can continue to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll circle back to you at some point in the future. And
I'd love to do that, Glenn.
We'll talk about this again, the same file. How's it going? What has happened? How has it morphed or has it? Those kind of things. That would be great.
Thank you. Love to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate this.
Thanks.